welcome back to the Cellar. This one may get out a little later, a few hours or maybe half a day later. I screwed up my connections and what have you, and this is being, I'm recording it a day later than normal. I normally do them on Thursday night. Now, normally that wouldn't have been a problem in this case because I'm not, Cheryl and I are not having our big family Thanksgiving thing until Sunday, and in a nod to A Christmas Stories tradition, we're having Chinese carryout because that's about the only thing all 12 people will eat is one form or another of Chinese food. So that's what we're doing on this Sunday. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Hope you're able to spend it with your family and your friends and your loved ones and the family members that you don't always feel so great about, but you put up anyway because, after all, they're family. And when it all comes down to it, family's all we got. Okay, this is going to be a short one because there weren't too many comments. And remember, please, I'll remind you again of several things. Number one, I do the following one based on the comments and the questions from the previous. If I miss it and I go more than a week and don't say something, make it again or go cut and paste it and do it again, whatever. And we don't have to just talk about D&D and role-playing. I like talking about all kinds of games because I play all kinds of games. Speaking of which, this year I have decided when I go to GaryCon in March that instead of running my normal 5 sessions of the Wheel of Blame, I will run 4 sessions of the Wheel of Blame. And on Saturday night, I'm going to run another iteration of Dirt Track Saturday Night, which is a game I've run there before, and great fun. Just what it sounds like, dirt track racing and bumping and bashing and knocking each other about all under the lights on Saturday night. It's great fun. Let's see, what else? Well, I'm sure I'll think of some more, and I'll mention it when I do. I found that I have DM'd for so long I find myself being a horrible player as my attention just slips away. I understand. I just really enjoy crafting campaigns and being really involved in the game. Anyway, my question is, I'm not sure if this has been asked before, but if it has, I apologize in advance. The question is, do I have a favorite artist from the early days of TSR? Whose work just hit you as, that's right on the money, the most? Favorite artist from the early days. Well, if you're talking about TSR artists, my favorite one from the time I was there would have to be Dave Trampier. Dave was able to do all kinds of really high quality art, not just the wonderful fantasy stuff he did for Wormy, and his use of color and bold design was, in my time when I was there, unparalleled. When I saw his game, I thought it was cool. Then he sent me his cartoon strip and he blew me away. In Gary's games, did most monsters live underground or did they roam the Earth's surface and build settlements? In game, how did Gary describe settlements of dwarves and elves? Well, I don't know that he did. It's certainly not in my presence. There might have been generalized descriptions about the elves live in the woods up over to the northwest, and and they live in the trees or something like that. There might have been generalized something about dwarves, but when you say monsters, I'm going to take it as the everything that isn't a player character. They didn't all live crammed in like a monstrous zoo, room after room after room after room. Now, I started that way too, but Gary was ahead of me in that there were, in Greyhawk, there were wings, if you will, or levels, the orc level, the goblin level. They were prone to get there, and we clean it out, and 6 weeks later they had crept back in somehow. It was all kind of rather mystical and magical, and nobody, peered too closely at it under a microscope. And yes, they, for the most part, lived where the terrain and the biosphere would have been most appropriate. If they were things that shunned light and the light of day and that, well, then they probably lived in caves and warrens underground or whatever. And animals lived where animals live. We further defined the biosphere of a dungeon and pointed out that if you actually did have all these zoos full of things to kill and collect EP points, how would they smell? What would they eat? What did they drink? So, for the most part, you didn't always find the monsters where you thought you were going to find them because they were out doing something else. But I never got the sense in Greyhawk that anything except larger, multiple hit dice monsters ever denned up, so to speak, the lower level stuff, orcs and goblins and kobolds and things like that, weren't as dug in as, say, a mind flayer might be, or a rakshasa, or something horrid like that. Yeah, that's. I guess that's how I'd characterize it. They lived outdoors if they were outdoor monsters, but outdoor monsters could find their way in. They could be held in there in stasis. They could have been placed in there as a trap. They could have wandered in. And, a buffalo was walking along somewhere along these ruins, and the ground collapses beneath him, and now he's running up and down the corridors looking for a way out and growing increasingly frenzied. Not anything you want to run into in the narrow confines of a corridor. Certainly not when the bison or aurochs or whatever it might be, whose horns spread nearly from wall to wall. No, not a good thing. Which made them really hard to fight and really terrifying. Pardon me. Gotta oil the tonsils. I'm a regular viewer. The Dice Man book has arrived, which is the history of Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson. And you're mentioned in the book with a picture and all. I had no idea. I've not seen the Dice Man book. No one has seen fit to send me one. So I haven't seen it. And, okay, I'd be interested to know whether you have any funny memories of meeting them and their work in general. This is a boring question. You can just ignore it. Thank you for all the great content. Well, when they were visiting company to company, I was kind of shunted aside because it wasn't my purview what licensing deals they were working out with Gary and Brian and for English distribution and whatever. Ian was a pretty droll, interesting guy. I'm sorry if he sees this, I don't remember Jackson all that well. We had an intern one summer from those guys, and I'm trying to remember his first name, and I can't, but he was so extraordinary. No, I take that back. That was with Ralph Partha. Never mind. But we did have a guy from, I think, Games Workshop that came over and spent a summer with the people at Ralph Partha. And I went out and had a plaque made calling the best, something about the best unpaid dude or whatever, something like that, because he was just a really great guy. And I'm sorry I don't remember it. It's been too many years ago, and we did not stay in touch. Was jousting or horse-driven combat a common part of early editions? Did goblins ride wolves in any games you remember? Well, yes and no, to answer that question. They weren't a big deal of anything underground, obviously. Not that happened above ground that would have justified having cavalry or whatever. Yes, because it was in Tolkien. There were wargs, and they got ridden, much to our chagrin and discomfort. But unless you were playing a chainmail or a swords and spells game, there wasn't any cavalry to speak of. Trying to think of any other monster type, and even with wargs being written, if you go by how big a warg is supposed to be, they really aren't designed to fight well in confined spaces. Certainly not in corridors. Now, maybe in a large cavern or a big room, or something like that, certainly. But they weren't the ideal. I always felt that as a designer, there had to be a certain logic. And even though it's fantasy, even fantasy has its own internal logic. And I thought that if you did apply a common sense logic, then stuff that's better outside would be outside. Now, could there be a boulet in a dungeon? Certainly. However, it's an outdoor monster designed to eat ponies. And there could certainly be one that's burrowed its way in, because after all, they burrow into hobbit burrows and eat the hobbits. So certainly one could burrow in if there was a food supply. But there's got to be a food supply. You can't just say, oh, they eat magic mana from heaven. If you're going to have a good, believable campaign, you have to make the ecology work. Or have a reason on how something works. Or have an excuse for how something works. But it's got to be there. You can't just say, oh yeah, they eat their special stuff because it appears in the air. No. I do recall a couple of chainmail games having to kill goblins on wargs. Yeah. And there were, when we were playtesting Swords and Spells, a smallish unit of wargs was easily equal to a medium-sized unit of medium horse, in that the fear they cause, and they cause the other side's horses to have a chance of stampeding or blocking, but other than the occasional stray that's lost wandering around or chases you into an underground situation, mounted doesn't work. Now, having said that, when I say mounted, I mean mounted with reasonably humanoid-sized critters, say 4 to 6 feet tall. That allows for some non-humans, small, because their height is like going to be from their waist, or actually from their butt up, plus the height of whatever they're riding, and unless you have unusually high tunnels and not the normal 10 feet tall and 10 feet wide standard, they're going to have trouble maneuvering and moving. And if what they're riding on lopes, they're going to bash their heads into the ceiling. So there again, you got to look at the physics. Did I ever meet Jennell? Absolutely. What do I think of her Dungeons design? I'm proud to say that I bought the very first piece of artwork she ever sold and put it in the magazine. Many years later in Texas, she recreated the cartoon and put some little Easter eggs in it and put it on a dice bag for me from the Texas convention. I think Jennell's an excellent mapper. I think there's 3 or 4 excellent mappers that I see their work on Facebook, particularly Dice and Logos. I have the utmost respect for, and I think Alyssa Fadden is just the cream of the crop. Besides being really being a neat person, as is Jennell. I have not met Dyson that I am aware of, or if I did, it must have been brief and I forgot or I didn't make the connection because I really respect his work as well. Okay, here's an assortment of questions on various topics, so please answer as many or as few as you desire. First, I've been going through Appendix N over the last several years now, and the experience has been very fulfilling for me. However, 2 things stand out as oddities in the appendix. The first is the emphasis of only the first 3 Hawkmoon books and not the final entry. Do you recall why the 4th Hawkmoon Quintet was seen as less important for inspirational reading? No, I don't, I'm sorry. The Hawkmoon books were not my contributions to the list. That was Gary. And as to what his personal notion was when he did it, I couldn't tell you. Remember, Gary was older than me. Gary had read a lot of the pulp stuff when it was published, and I only saw it after it had been collected in anthologies. So his early reading was much broader. Read a lot of good stuff, a lot of bad stuff, and I don't necessarily know all of his criteria. Some of the books we had both read, absolutely no doubt about it. And then we had some that I read, and then some he read, and we kind of played trade it. And no, I don't remember which ones. No, don't go there. It's just something that happened in a business meeting a long time ago. But obviously he didn't care for it, or it'd have been on there. Now, it might be one of the ones that Gary said that they kind of petered out, in his opinion. They kind of petered out at the end. Maybe that's why. Don't know. Second, the inclusion of the Carnelian Cube was the only book so far that I had to take a long break during the reading of, and after finishing it, I couldn't see any clear element of the story which would correlate to inspiring play at the table. What was the reason for its inclusion by name? I'll try and explain. The members of the contents of Appendix N were basically stuff we'd read that had either formed our brains when they were still wet clay, or we were industriously mining for ideas that we could steal, modify, borrow, beg to put into our own games and our own campaigns. It was Gary. Something about it inspired Gary. That's really all I can tell you because I really don't know anymore. And I never got to reading it because I think at the time we were having trouble finding copies of it, and there was no Amazon and stuff like that. So if you couldn't find it in a used bookstore that you happened to be in the city wherein it did business, you didn't get it. It's much harder to track down books back before the internet. Much harder. Next, if you could have had supreme editorial authority over the development of Dungeons & Dragons in the early days, what class would you have removed from the game prior to print, and why would it have been Brian Bloom's sore-thumb David Carradine avatar? Once again, the monk was originally introduced as an NPC/specialist. They were like the uber thief. Now, depending upon the temple the monk belonged to, they may or may not be inclined to go steal stuff. But You're right. It was Brian's love of kung fu, and I don't. Please don't get me wrong. I watched it too, kung fu, and I like certain elements of it. I like the flute music, and other things of it. And it was the first movie or first TV show of its kind, so I kind of enjoyed that. Um, but I didn't worship at David Carradine's feet, and or the master or anybody else. Yeah, I canned that one right away, and then about 40 that came after wouldn't have come. I'd have killed them in the shell. You don't need 6 or 7 different kinds of crusaders, which are really just a form of a paladin, which are really just a form of a fighting man. Please give me a break. Oh, something besides the working on the D20 delving, I've had another project, editing slash rewrite project fall into my lap. So all of a sudden I'm busy, and I kind of like it because I'm not getting rich at it, but it is nice to receive PayPals and, hey, you have money at PayPal. Whoa, cool. I've signed an NDA, so I can't really talk about it until I'm told I can. Lastly, on a serious note, I'm considering developing a gaming magazine which would be distributed electronically rather than physically. What advice do you have for finding content and keeping it fresh with the tight turnaround time similar to those that you described, having been under with the Dragon? Thank you for your time, and okay, you're welcome. Well, okay, I could type in or scan or whatever today manuscripts, but I wouldn't. I would get files, and if I was running a magazine, I would specify how you wanted to receive submissions. It's got to be a Word file. It's got to be a Word file, at least Word 7 or newer, whatever. You can set it up. Now, if you want to try to eliminate some work for yourself, you can, when you're soliciting, point out that something that conforms to, and you designate a set of standards, like, for instance, the standards that a manuscript has to be given to Drive-Thru RPG for them to be able to print on demand. You can pay a little more for those when they're prepared like that because it's a lot less work for you. You don't have to transcribe all these manuscripts. They already come in a Word file. We had to transcribe, literally type out all the handwritten manuscripts with all the editing marks in them and all that. And so, bingo. If it comes in on a file, ton of work saved. If you can edit, make sure it comes in a file form that you can edit in the body of the text. And bingo, boy, is that so much easier than having to, draw, take it out marks and putting in marks and crossing words out and writing in blue ink somewhere along the side what it was supposed to, blue pencil, what it was supposed to be. We used blue because it didn't pick up when it was, when they did the photo, didn't replicate like the old fax machines wouldn't deal with blue. Oh, there's something floating around in the air. Interesting. I saw it on the screen. Oh, there's something again. I wonder what my cats are up to now. Feathers in the air. Good thing I don't own a bird. And then the fact that you can manipulate the artwork to fit exactly the way you want it to fit. And you can tweak the color exactly the way you want to tweak it. All sitting at a keyboard is astounding. You ought to be able to physically put together and produce in under a week. Now, it'll take you a little longer to solicit the material, and it'll take you longer to solicit the art, particularly if you're going to buy art on specified art. Hey, so and so, I need something that's got dinosaurs fighting cavemen with a wizard flying overhead, or whatever, as opposed to stuff that just comes in. Hi, if you can use this, please do pay me when you do. Type of unsolicited stuff. You want to sell space in there. If you're not going to make anything doing this, why are you doing it? Believe me, zeal for doing it for the love of gaming is a very thin soup. That was pretty good. Seriously, it is a very thin soup. I write sometimes when I do, simply because I gotta write. It's part of me. I don't gotta put together a magazine. So you gotta want to do it, and you gotta make some money at it. So sell advertising. There again, you have an enormous advantage over the way we did Dragon and Little Wars, in that they send you the artwork and you scan it and print it. You don't have to separate it. It doesn't take a multiple run through the press to get all 4 colors down. So much easier. What do you fill it with? Well, you either fill it with stuff that you like, written by people that are so good at writing that people want to read them, and or you fill it with current stuff. The danger in that is, if you don't know the game or the system yourself and don't have a trusted acquaintance whose opinion and smarts you value, you run the risk of having egg all over your face if you print an article by a crackpot that doesn't understand the game either. I didn't have that problem because there weren't so many. The proliferation hadn't spread yet. And when it was something that I was totally unfamiliar with, I knew people. I say, can you read this and tell me if this guy's full of hot air or what? So I had other people I could bounce it to that knew the system. But that's because I had connections within the clan of game makers back then. If you can't sell ads, forget it. Cover art is not nearly as important as it was for me. I had to put a cover up there that competed with the other gaming magazines on the newsstand. You just have to sell it well online. Hey, come check out this really cool magazine. We're running articles on this, and this, and if you think you could like to write, and you've got a much smoother tool. But it's still work. You still got to be a good editor yourself or have one. Because if it's not well put together, if it's not well edited, you'll sell a couple of copies and it'll die on the vine. You got to have something on yours that's novel. Whether it's the next Wormy or Phineas Fingers or a gaming puzzle challenge like some magazine used to do. Here's this counter, this counter, this counter. It's this turn. What do you do? Type of thing. A puzzle, whatever. Some good comic strips. Phineas Fingers sold a lot of copies for me. Wormy sold more. Knights of the Dinner Table helped Jolly Shadis magazine quite a bit. And then when Shadis folded up, he started getting them published in Dragon. And that helped it even more. The more eyeballs that see your product, the better. And that's about all I got to say on that. Ooh, no, I'm not Forrest. Good day, Tim. Oh, an Aussie, perhaps? Recently got invited to a home game where the players are playing in a mythic Greek setting. Aside from being great to link my love of Greek history with D&D, it got me thinking about crafting settings. How do you go about making a setting feel deep and have a history to it? I want to make a place that feels like it has a history with eras, etc. Then you do what I did. I probably have 12 or 13,000 words already written on the history of the world that my games are centered on and played in, about the history, about this era, that era, how it basically explains how what you're setting them down into came to be. And if you want a deep campaign, you're going to have to write all this up in advance. You don't have to tell them all in the beginning. This is stuff that they can absorb and learn as it proceeds. But you got to know it, or at least be able to wing it if you get caught unprepared for a question, and then write down what you answered so you don't contradict yourself. That's one of the easiest pitfalls for DMs to get into. You end up with a rules lawyer or a mnemonic memory at the end of the table. But you said, and oh shit, you did. I am not in favor of basing a whole campaign on one mythos. I like my world to have the possibility of many different mythoses, it being available, or just as Gary had the Knoll level and the Orc level, and that I would like to have, my world has a lot of large islands because there was a magic-induced cataclysm many hundreds or thousands of years ago. I don't remember exact chronology of what I wrote many years ago. But anyway, a lot of the larger continents broke up, drifted around, and formed a lot of really, really large islands. Not necessarily Australia large, but certainly New Zealand and Tasmania large. And there are still a few, significantly sized continents. But in so setting up a world like that, I can have anything, anything I want to put in there, I can find a place for. I'm working on a module, an adventure that's centered around a clan or sept of seagoing dwarves, which, according to all the mythology and everybody's books, dwarves hate the water. But this clan was isolated in this catastrophe, and while mostly drowned, not all drowned, rebuilt, found themselves surrounded by ocean, and figured out if they wanted to find food or whatever, they were going to have to go out and get it. And so they basically developed these very novel ships. And then, of course, being dwarves and mechanics and that, they have some interesting weapons on board their boats. So that's set over there. And I haven't developed it all the way yet, but I thought about it. It's easy to have an adventure in in a large biosphere that's Celtic or Greek. My taste would run to Mayan or Aztec. Viking, they're all murder hobos anyway, so what would be the fun there? That's just the way I would do it. That's the way I have done it. That way I have the option of plugging anything in I want anywhere, because it's a big globe after all. And it's there to be done, to be played in. Again, if you're using a basically medieval or perhaps even early Renaissance type setting, you got to remember that 700 miles is a seemingly insurmountable distance to a lot of people. So you can have this Celtic culture here and 700 miles away on another landmass or island. You can have a thriving Mayan culture. Just give them the right terrain, the right climate, whatever. I like that idea more than I like basing an entire world on Greek mythology. To me, that's too limiting, too boring. Okay. Goes on to say, I'm still moving forward with my tabletop role-playing club idea. Have my pitch set and been getting signatures to prove interest, and have got my core DMs group set to come aboard. Cheers for your help with the idea. Well, good. I'm glad. Gamers need to find each other so we can commiserate each other's weirdness and play games. Oh yeah, I meant to ask a second question. How do you feel about the rumor that the Wizards of the Coast is potentially not allowing third-party content based on one D&D, whatever the hell they're going to call it? Also, that they have gotten rid of Dragon Plus. I'm not sure what that. I'm predicting a big paywall in the future. Okay. God only knows what Hasbro's got up their sleeve. The only thing you can count on is that whatever they do, they will do for the purpose of generating a return for their stockholders, i.e. profits. That's what companies do. If they do it badly, and people just say, oh, one D&D sucks turds, and nobody buys it, well, they may quietly shelve it like some of the other editions have been done, or it might kill the brand. I doubt the latter. Whatever they do, it will be done to maximize return for Hasbro. That's what companies do. I think whoever put forth the idea of no third-party content has their head so far up their ass, they need a glass button in their belly button so they can see where they're going. Third-party content drives games. It keeps systems alive. In our own experience at TSR in the beginning days, we didn't have the time to do what we gladly let the Judges Guild do. That's why we licensed them. They put out stuff that kept people playing. When they ran out of their own ideas, they'd switch over and, okay, we're going to play this module for a while. Third-party content. I think the vast support that third-party content provides is grossly underestimated if that's what they are planning to do. It's all speculation. You know, this whole one D&D I find pretentious and absurd. It's never been one D&D. Everybody's run it a little differently from anybody else. And to say that this woke, sanitized, sanded down version is the one D&D is pretentious and an idea that's just full of shit. There will always be variations. There will always be people playing. Just like scientists find an isolated gene pool of the little three-toed jumping pink lizard. Oh, we thought it was extinct. Nope. Here's this whole little ecosystem, this little micro ecosystem that's full of these things. Might be the way for other additions. I don't know. I don't have a magic crystal ball to predict that. I think if they decide to do that, to make no OGL, I think they're fools. I think they don't have the foggiest idea of how this industry has lasted as long as it has. We couldn't produce enough stuff ourselves, not in-house. Third-party stuff drives. People buy something that's made for this, supposedly, read through and go, oh, well, I'm going to lift this and this and this, and I'm going to put it in that. We're adaptive. We're scroungers. We being DMs. A lot of people do use wisdom as a dump stat. Not PCs, people. Yeah, I think there's some truth there. Okay. Now here's some silly shit. Dear Tim, question, what if, or the timeline in which Adventure Gaming Magazine continued on, prelude. Hope this isn't a painful subject, but I'd be pleased, and if it is, please incinerate my comment. If AGA had survived and thrived, in what ways do you think that your taste in RPG systems would have broadened or changed from the frozen in amber at 1.5? I've been saying that wrong all this time. It should really be 0.5 because I'm halfway between 0 and 1. So I got to remember to start doing that better. Well, I might have found other systems that I also liked, but I certainly can't ever foresee completely dropping something that I had such an influence in and so many fingers in for something else. That's my perspective. I would, as editor and publisher, I would certainly publish articles about games that I thought were good or games that were very popular and looked like they had staying power. Flavor of the week is not what I mean. Something that had staying power. How would it change? I have no way of figuring that out because everything happens in a timeline. And so maybe I see this new game and, well, it's pretty cool. And then this one comes out, and this one, oh, it's even better. I don't know. I do know that when I left the industry, I left the industry. I was fed up with it. I was a little bit disillusioned with it. I loathed the blooms still. And so I got on with my life, and I got a real job, and I raised my kids, and I coached soccer for years, and yada, 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 yada. Who knows what would have been different? If I hadn't seen a little tiny 4 lines of type article in a fishing magazine about this organization that had chapters, one of which was in Cincinnati, and here was a phone number, I wouldn't have spent 20 years working with the local chapter of Fishing Has No Boundaries and building it up from 5 people coming from the same group home in a bus to 200 people coming over a 2-day weekend. It's really, really hard, and I think people that say they can go back and point their finger at some point in time and say, here, I think that's a bit pretentious. if I continue in the field, could your preferences have evolved based on new systems that you've been exposed to? Possibly. I know for a fact that as soon as post-apocalyptic came out again, because I was always a fan of Gamma World, but gaming public wasn't really ready for it then. We sold some copies, and then it kind of languished. I know that I'd have been more in post-apocalyptic because rules there are no rules, so to speak. Of course there are. There's got to be rules, but compared to the confines of RPG, fantasy RPG rules, it was a much more wide open, loosey-goosey, try it and see what happens type of game. So I might have gone there. I'd probably gotten even deeper into the Illuminati. That's a brilliant card game, but only if everybody playing the game really has no problem hating the other people at the table for the next 2 hours or wherever long it takes, and has a really good understanding of the game. All right. Now, this next one comes off the Patreon comment list from a while back, apparently. Apparently, it was when I was going away for, I don't know, might have been the reunion, might have been Game Hall. As a kid, I was introduced to miniatures at a young age, 5, and then Moldvay at 7. I started playing at 9. Can you discuss if you know anything of interest that is not known about the mythical companion that was never produced by the Moldvay group that produced what is now called BX? I think I remember a snatch conversation here or there from people that might have occasion to know that the last book didn't come out for several reasons that I've heard. BX didn't sell all that well, so they didn't see devoting the time and effort into a third to go along with a game that wasn't selling all that well. Management changes, management shuffle-ups played a part in it. It may have become at a time when the TSR was strapped for money. There were several occasions in their history that they found themselves strapped for money. Several occasions, well, one occasion in particular cost the company dearly. That's all I know about it. Wasn't there. I was recently was taken over, this same person, to see a group of new players in their 20s playing 5th. I knew enough about the game mechanics to ask questions. However, it did not take long for me to realize that something is missing. I could not put my finger on it, but it didn't feel as in-depth. Still, they were rotating DMs, which I thought was a good idea. What are your thoughts on 5e, especially when comparing it with other versions? 5e. That millions of other people love it is fine with me. What you might have found missing on that first time was a certain investment in the whole thing that comes from asking questions and obtaining information. I don't believe that 5e either encourages or enables the players to gather information in a sane, logical, effective fashion. And it certainly doesn't reward initiative. Not with skills and abilities and all this crap. 5e misses the, oh shit, let's just try it. The improv on the fly feel of first edition, and it's certainly OD&D. It doesn't encourage thought. It doesn't require a great deal of intellectual investment. With the first edition, if you got a table full of good players, they're hanging on every word, paying attention to everything that's going on. They're not looking at their phone. They're not filing their nails. They're not rooting through their bag for something to eat while there's stuff going on. They're just not doing that. That's probably what's missing. That level of intense involvement, that buying into it. They don't have enough skin in the game. Just my thoughts. Again, I'll tell you, if you're going to be in the Cincinnati area in January, or it's not that far a drive, go online and look up Ice and Dice. It's a new effort. They kickstarted it to get enough money to do it right. They say, and I hope. And I said, sure, I'll come run a couple of games on Saturday, and I hope it does well. I truly do. The problem we have with CincyCon is the person now running it runs it almost always on the same weekend as GaryCon, or 1 week either side of it, and that's just not good planning, because not everybody has enough money to go to both. And I'll be the first to admit, if I had X number of dollars and I could go to GaryCon, or I could go to CincyCon, even though I've been a Cincy native or a resident for 41 years, I'd go to GaryCon. Now, if GaryCon's in March, and they run CincyCon in April, late April, early May, well, hell yeah, I'd do them both. But if you make me take a choice, I'll take the big one. But anyway, enough of that. Check it out if you want to. Let's see, what else is going on? Not much. I understand my Kickstarter is going to be released. My Kickstarter has been delayed. I have nothing, no hands in it, no fingers in it whatsoever. Because there were so many components that were added on in so many stretch goals. And I think when it does finally come out, it's going to be one of the most impressive packages of stuff in a Kickstarter ever. Hoping it comes out. D20 Delving is supposed to be out in January. I know that in the next 2 weeks we'll be making all the recordings for the cards, because I'm rewriting them all now into my voice, and it'll only probably take a day to read them all. So it's a small part. They're already at the press. They're already being printed. There's, components. And the fact that NPR is interested, I find just exciting as hell. So let's hope. Let's see, anything else? I can't think of anything else. I know I'm a day late. But it might not make any difference to you. I do hope you had a good Thanksgiving. And do be sensible in the next few weeks. And make sure you hold on to enough to take care of the things that really count, and not blow it all on good ideas at the time. It's taken a lot of years for my wife to pound that out of me. Seemed like a good idea at the time. It's Christmas. So it's not Christmas yet, though we do have our lights up. Turn them on Thanksgiving. I seem to have run out of anything to talk about. So I'll just say the final Dodata Gobi. Hello, and welcome to my cellar.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Last man around when them rates went down. Calling Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. ESR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Titan with tramp under a tree, high as could be. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.